What can architects learn from science fiction? My name is Lara Schrijver. I'm professor at University of Antwerp, and I'd like to take you along on a story of why science fiction might be a beneficial extra tool for architects to design their buildings.
This is Design Sciences.
First, the architects. They design a future, you can say. They make a building and they envision the life within. They think about how their building will begin to work. At the same time, from history, we know that their futures are not always what it turns out to be. Not quite how they planned. You could say science fiction also looks at the future. But we know from a science fiction that there are usually pretty dark futures. And all of those buildings that we've designed end up being difficult, technological disasters. Presuming that architects do not want to design a dark future, why on earth could it be useful for them to think about a faraway future, an impending apocalypse, or alien lifestyles? The story helps us enter a life that is other. It helps us envision a future with empathy. And most importantly for designers, it helps us think about how that future life will actually work in the nitty-gritty details of everyday life. For those of you who love science fiction, this is probably already something you know. For those of you who have never really ventured off into science fiction, yes, I'm giving you license to stream as much as you can. So how does this work? Let me take you on a path through one example. This is the Abraxas building, Les Espaces d'Abraxas, in Marne-la-Vallée, outskirts of Paris. It was designed by Ricardo Bofill in 1978 in a massive wave of urban expansion by the French government. At the time, a communist government in Saint-Denis. The most important things you need to know about this building are that it was a massive social housing estate, 600 apartments, over 1,000 people living there. It was designed with the idea that it would become a community, a strong community, and all of its historical references, the classical columns, the pediments, were meant to enforce a sense of history. But for those of you who have never ventured to Marne-la-Vallée beyond Disneyland Paris, you might actually know this building. Most likely from the Hunger Games, where it was used in the 4th section in Mockingjay to project a very difficult totalitarian society. And you see already that the space itself has a threat in its color. But for those of you who like to watch urban vlogs, you might also know it from other people who encourage the tourist trajectory through spectacular buildings from our architecture history. Now, this image is part of popular culture, and the scale of that arch, the drama of these apartments, these 600 apartments over 18 stories, is visible in many different music videos, vlogs, movies. And the interesting thing is, it gives us other information than what the architect does. Now, the architect helps us to see the vision they had. There was a moment where these beautiful colors, this big building, this new experiment was seen with much optimism. It was hopeful That's what we see in the images. It was hopeful, and it was also looked at from the outside. And that's where science fiction comes in. Because in all of those movies, that this, Abraxas, had been the background, we see how it can also be seen from the perspective of people who are not so interested in the architecture, but simply in how it works. In 1985, in the movie Brazil, by Terry Gilliam of Monty Python fame, we see the living area from the top. And as we see Robert De Niro skating down on the line, you see how deep these chasms are. You see how deep this building is and how almost breathtakingly scary and massive this space is. Later on in Brazil, the slightly lower angle makes the building lean out at us as if there's some massive machinery that we're trying to enter, which is aligned with the story. Our poor protagonist, who is trying to fight this bureaucratic state, always has to go through these spaces that are overpowering and scary. The Hunger Games shows what this might become if the rubble and the endless emptiness become the most marked features of the building. What happens after society breaks down? And how does that building work then? And the newest in the European co-productions, Arcadia, a TV series that talks about a totalitarian state, uses the emptiness of these spaces that the architect thought would be filled with people hanging out, having drinks, having picnics. Instead, this TV series shows how maybe everyday people might see it as just a very big square to cross. So as architects look forward to a future, as a century ago, the Soviet architects did too, with one of my favorite projects by Georgy Krutikov, the Flying City. A flying city that was meant to be above the ground of the earth so that we could leave nature to be what it needed to be, and we would live in the sky. Krutikov has these beautiful images of a city up in the clouds. But what he doesn't show is what it would be like on the inside. And for that old movie Brazil has a suggestion of what it might become. In other words, why watch science fiction? If you are an aspiring architect, or even one working right now, of course, your view will always be the most optimistic of what your building will become. I would argue, and I often tell my students, that it's important to look at all these other pop culture visions of what becomes of buildings after things have broken down. I hope this is enough for you to get behind watching a few movies on occasion as you prepare for a new design. Thank you.
Universiteit Antwerpen. Bepaal mee de toekomst.